the most popular model these days. And we studied also the Cairo model, and then the Jack J. Phillips model of return on investment. And there was a popular demand from the students that I should cover the calculation of return on investment that is based on the fifth level of the Jack J. Phillips model. So, and some people gave me emails also asking me to cover that. They were afraid that it might be asked in the paper, that they may be asked to calculate ROI in a paper. I looked up at the papers also, so no need to worry about that. I don't think it is very difficult to give you a question to calculate ROI, because a lot of data will have to be given. Anyways, I have included in this session, for those people who really want to know about the calculation on return on ROI, the return on investment, and the we'll do with an example of ESI survey. ESI stands for Employees State Insurance, and they have huge number of employees, and um, they have conducted a kind of survey, and the the calculations will be based on that. It's not a Indian based calculation, but that will serve the purpose. I think you'll get an understanding how it is done. I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I don't think that would be really, you will be really asked to do that. Unless you are working with an organization completely and they provide you with the data, uh, you will not be able to do it. But that is all right. Like for an example, to get an understanding how to go about it, we will do that. And now I'm sharing my screen. I have made elaborate PowerPoints. So one thing I want you to know is, if anyone wants the PowerPoints also, that can be uploaded and can be given to you, because I made them elaborate purposely, because this is not a face-to-face class and I'm not able to see your reaction. So it is better to keep things in an explanatory way with you, so that the elaborate PowerPoints will help you when you are revising your course curriculum. So let us go on, and I will share my screen, and we'll start with a return on investment calculation, which I have made specially for you people. So if you remember, the ROI model had 5 levels. The Kirkpatrick model has an additional level here, in which we calculate the return on investment. And the return on investment in the fifth level is actually based on the data that is accumulated in level 4. That is the impact level of Jack J. Phillips. So we'll start from here, and so be with me. I'll try to go through it very quickly. Why do we actually calculate the return on investment? That this is very important to understand, because otherwise none of the calculations are going to help you. Why do we need it? Actually, to first thing is to justify the training budget. You spend a lot of amount on training, and resources these days are really like, people are stingy about the resources, and so to justify the training budget, maintain or increase the training rupees, that is so that you keep on getting money also. And for that we need to determine the effectiveness of training, whether it is really enhancing performance or not. If you remember, I showed you a graph. There is a desired standard of performance which every organization wants to reach for its employees. And if a training is able to provide them that standard of performance in the students, then it is called an effective training. So to determine whether the training had been effective or not, how effective it had been, to determine that, we need to calculate the ROI. Then to evaluate the training method used, whether the methods were correct or not, and the use of the time for trainer and employee. To determine if there was a change in time, cost, or behavior. like was there, if an activity was taking say 1 hour, has it reduced to 40 minutes or something like that? Change in time. Now the production cost has reduced because of the training of the employees or the behavior. People are faster, some attitudinal change is there, and or some gain in the knowledge is there. To provide evidence to management or stakeholders that yes, our trainings are good enough and we should go in for training, and future trainings should be um, invited and people should be sent on future trainings. To build trust and respect for ourselves and the trainers, to gain credibility with executives, to identify areas for improvement. Yes, somebody wants to ask me something? Okay, to identify areas for improvement. And because your supervisor asked for the information, that can be one big reason. And to keep our jobs and to help staff keep their jobs. So there is something called benefit cost ratio. Actually, ROI can be calculated in two ways. Some people just take out the benefit cost ratio, or otherwise you take out a percentage. So both the ways it is correct. And the benefit cost ratio is the basic thing in ROI. Like that is what we actually take out. This is a quantification of the relation between the benefits of a program and the costs. So you take out the ratio of benefits and costs, and that gives you the BCR. Actually, the important thing here is when the BCR is greater than 1, like the ratio is in the favor of the benefits, then the program is considered to be a success. If the BCR is less than 1, then you have lost somewhere something, and it indicates that improvements or changes probably need to be made to justify the continuation of the program, or maybe to just scrap off that training. But if the BCR is less than 1, then the organization must also look at the intangible benefits. That is, the benefits that are hidden, that are not like, that cannot be measured. For example, reduce stress. For example, more the culture in the organization, and more creativity of the employees. Now the other thing is to calculate the ROI percentage. So you can either take out the BCR ratio or the ROI percent. ROI percentage, you take out the percentage of benefit minus cost upon cost. Take out the percentage of that and you will get the ROI percent. So a result here greater than 100% means that the program has a net benefit after accounting for the costs involved in running it. For instance, an ROI percent of 150%, it means that program has yielded a percent return on money invested. And the program yielded $1.50 for every dollar, or you can say 150 rupees for every 1 rupee that cost you. A result less than 100% means the program had a net cost. That means that it did not favor so well, and you need to see what the, like you need to see where, how you can derive more benefits from this training. Now, if you remember, I showed you these steps last time in the Jack J. Phillips model, and how we go about it is collect the pre-program data, that is before the training starts, collect the post-program data after the training, and this could be staggered into the workplace collection of data also, and later also, after some time has passed after the training. Then we need to isolate the effects of the program, and there's some disturbance going on. Please don't disturb the class. Who is that? Try to control yourself and don't disturb the class. Okay, so I will just continue with that. Oh, so I was just making you go through the steps again. So the third step is isolating the effects of the program, like really how the steps have helped, like how the training has helped. Is it really because of the training or some other things in the organization? Then converting data to the monetary value. This is quite a difficult task to do, but nowadays people are attempting everything and trying to monetize everything. Then calculate the return on the investment. Actually, before that, you must tabulate the program costs also. And uh, after calculating the return on investment or separately, you should also identify intangible benefits that accrue. And ROI has a formula, net program benefits upon program costs. So that is the formula. And let us look at one example. It is the example of ESI ROI calculation. And they ran a course of project management and business analysis and learning. So that was the training, and they conducted surveys. And it was not just training, one training program. It was over a period of time for many students. Huh? So now collecting pre and post program data. And that was the first thing that we needed to do. So a survey approach to ROI was taken, and actually that is the most effective and efficient one method. You can go about either measuring the actions or measuring the opinions, but measuring the actions is not so easy, and measuring the opinions is easier because you can throw questions at people and they will give you answers, and you will be able to elicit information about their opinions about the program. So that is a good survey methodology. How you make the questions. We covered this in constructing questionnaires and all that. So I don't need to go into that because I want to complete this quickly. And how good questions so you should ask your questions in different forms from different perspectives. It could be you may be thinking that I am asking the same question again and again, but it is better because then you can cull out the information and filter out the things that are not required, or people just say lie or something. That would be easy for you to find out. So for ROI to be credible, provide as many different perspectives as possible to validate the data. That is essential. And it is essential that your data should be reliable. If possible, include the students, managers, or colleagues in the evaluation process to enhance the credibility of the ROI number. You can throw a survey to them also, so that you can match the data that you get from the students and also from their immediate bosses or higher bosses. Then the next thing you need to do is build the survey. And there are three prerequisite measures, and that is you have to measure at the learning effectiveness. That is just when the training has stopped, even before the training. And you can give tests also, you can make surveys also. Then at the job impact, and then at the level of business results. And they provide quantitative proof to support the final conclusion. So at these three places, you will have to, at least like here, you have to measure the leads, the data that you will get. Now, learning effectiveness. In this survey that I'm talking about, they use the Likert scale. And I showed you the Likert scale in one of the sessions. And it has many boxes, like 5 boxes, and you can grade them into strong to weak. And you can typically ask questions. And in this survey, they asked to what extent the students experienced gains in knowledge and skills as a result of the course. It wasn't one question, there were a number of questions seeking this information. And on a Likert scale, they presented with quality measures in a top box form, like the highest knowledge and skill gained would be the most I gained most would be at the top, and the lowest would be it wasn't effective or not good would be the lowest one. So top box was whoever ticked the top boxes, the data was collected. So top box analysis, which groups responses that agree or strongly agree. These were the two top boxes, and this was used, and it works well for quality and effectiveness measures. So you can collect data from these top boxes and use them, and it is conservative and tends to show deviations that might get lost through simple averaging. So it's not like you should take all the data, all the 5 boxes and average them. Instead, they took the top box analysis. So Likert scale on results of a top box analysis performed by ESI International in a survey of 30,000 students who took project management training. They were tabulated and they show the quality and effectiveness of the training. What data they collected, I'll show you in the next slide. So this is the data they collected, and on quality and effectiveness of training. So the headings are like this. They first ask the quality and percentage of learners selecting the top box. Whoever take the top box, they were given the numbers were noted. So very satisfied were 80% people. Very satisfied with instructor performance were 80%. Very satisfied with content and delivery 76%. Training effectiveness, again somewhere, I think they didn't take data on this. Experience significant, knowledge and skills gain. This was again 79%. So the job impact measures, that is the second level where the surveys were done. So the learning effectiveness you saw in the earlier slide. Now for the second level, asked students about their ability to apply learning on the job and to what extent the training has improved their work effectiveness. So there were again questions on that, and people had to tick the appropriate boxes. So this here you seek to understand how quickly students are able to apply new knowledge and skills on the job. Whatever they learned in the training, how well they are able to apply it in the working conditions. And to what extent the training contributed to increase job performance and productivity. Now, job impact is best measured in a post-event survey 30 to 90 days after the class. So 1 month, or in this kind of program, they said that it should be after 30 days to 90 days. So 60 days would be ideal, I think. And it is not from the course evaluation, not the reaction that they gave for the course. It was when they were working on the job. So the following measures are from the ESI survey and demonstrate how job impact measures are typically expressed. So what they collected in the data, I'll show you in the next slide. Now the job impact survey revealed the following. 60 days after the class, 70% of the learners responded positively when asked whether they were able to successfully apply the knowledge and skills they learned to their jobs. This is all the data that has been culled out from the survey. They were given a survey and they made choices in them, and from that it was 70%. 80% said they had used the knowledge and skills they learned within 6 weeks. And an additional 18% reported that they plan to use it in the near future. 60 days after the training, 66% of the learners reported that the training had contributed to a significant improvement in their job performance. So then they took out an average, and they said on average, learners reported a 9% improvement directly tied to the training investment. This data is based upon the questions that ask them, how much do you think is the training directly improved your performance, which was not being done earlier. So most of them gave on a scale, and the average of that was 9%. And this value is critical because actually this is the value which can be attributed to the training directly, which is our fourth step. So 9% improvement directly tied to the tied to the training investment, and this is resulting directly from the training that they got. Now the next measure was the business results measure. So quantitative evidence must be provided to show specifically where and by how much has the training helped. And here you ask questions related to specific desired outcomes and by measuring the extent to which the training impacted each. The data collected in the ESI project has been tabulated, and I'll show you the table, and it demonstrates how business results might be quantified. So here you get this business results and the percent of learners reporting an impact on the business result and average training contribution for all learners. So increased quality, you can see the data. They took increased quality, decreased cost, decreased risk, decreased cycle time, increased effective communication, increased productivity, increased customer satisfaction, increased employee engagement, and so on. So this is the data that could be tabulated after the business results. So this is all tabulation. Actually, it is important to create a post-event feedback loop. Like whenever the training is happening, you should have a cycle. Like after 30 to 90 days, you will take the survey, and this should be like done every time. It is not just done once. So the delegates manager also should be surveyed to corroborate the findings, like whether what the student is saying, is it matching with what the managers are saying, what the bosses are saying. Of course, all the three surveys, the course evaluation, that is immediately after the class, the post-course student survey, and the post-course manager survey should be structured so that the data can be validated among them. So they should be like there should be questions on the similar things when you're giving it to the bosses and to the students. Now what we do is determine a cost basis. What is our cost? What is our investment? And that is very important. Otherwise, we will not be able to calculate the ROI. So calculated training related costs like the per student, tuition fees, courseware, instructor fees, traveling, lodging, venue, snacks, administrative costs, photocopying, material, and all that. So the average, then the second portion is the average salary of the attendees. Why are we calculating the salary also? Actually, what they are doing is that is the opportunity cost. The people who are attending the training, they are being away from the office. They are not doing the office work. They're not being productive in that sense, and they are spending time on the training, but they are being paid their salaries, etc. So that is a cost to the organization. Without getting work from them, they are paying them salaries. So that is also included. Now we do the calculation. Now the most important number in determining ROI is the direct contribution to performance improvement. And if you remember, it was 9 in this. So learners reported a 9% improvement in productivity. And that was specifically due to the training they attended. However, when self-assessing, we generally try to be very optimistic and we try to tell more, like it was like this or that. And so it has to be toned down. For this reason, the performance improvement percentage should be factored down by 35% to compensate for the bias. And this actually how we do it is based upon a survey conducted by knowledge advisors. It was done on 500 million students, and it is seen that there is a bias in students. They try to assess it to be more, and they try to be overly optimistic. So every data is to be toned down and factored. So this then the original 9% will be toned down, and the improvement reported in the ES study was toned down to 5.82%. that is the 35%, and to compensate for the self-reporting bias. And likewise, if the manager survey responses do not correlate with the student responses, additional factoring down may be required. So that they become closer together. That is required. And now the benefit from training or return is calculated by multiplying the percent performance increase by the average student's salary. So here, please look at it carefully. We multiply the percent performance increase. You have got a number after all the data and averaging and everything, and that is by the average student's salary, that is to be multiplied. We choose it to be salary because on average, the organizations benefit from their employees. Actually, they are not paying you so much salary as much the work they are taking out of you. And in other words, they derive more value from the employees than the cost of the employee. And therefore, it can be concluded that if an individual's productivity increases by 5.8%, as it did in the study of ESI, then the company would benefit more than 5.82%. Using salary as a basis for calculating investment return is actually conservative, as the real return would there theoretically be higher. Like it could be 7% also, but here we take it as the data is given. So the return here will be $80,000 if that is the average salary. It could be any salary depending upon the MNC or the organization, into 5.82%, and that is the performance increase, and that gives you $4656. So the investment here is $1,600, which I didn't show you, but they calculated it, and this is the fully loaded class cost, and the ROI therefore comes out to be 4656 minus 1600 divided by 1600, and that is 191% per student monetary benefit. So this number shows only the return side of the ROI calculation. In this case, the training generated $4656 in monetary benefit for each student taking the course. Though technically ROI is a single calculation, there are few additional ROI related calculations that can be performed to help communicate the impact more effectively. Like the training has had impact that can be done by doing a monetary benefit per learner that we did just now, benefit to cost ratio, I talked about that earlier, and average payback period. That is also there. Benefit to cost ratio here will be, this ratio articulates the monetary value of the training relative to the the ratio articulates the monetary value of the training. And for the ESI study, the companies and government agencies investing in project management and business analysis training received $2.91 for every dollar they invested in training. Now the benefit to cost ratio is 2.91. We do not have the supporting data, how they arrived at $2.91, but that we will have to accept. Then the payback period. This is a time-based ROI calculation which indicates how long in months it will take to pay back the initial investment in the training. The investment in training is not paid back immediately, it takes some time. And to calculate the payback period, divide the per student monetary benefit by 12. That is the monthly benefit. So because we did it on average salary, annual salary, we will have to take it out by monthly. Then divide the investment by the monthly benefit to get the payback period. So 4656 was the annual benefit divided by 12 months. That will give you the monthly payback. And then you have the investment. Already you know the investment. You divide it by 388. So 4.12 to pay back the investment. So that is how it will be. So this is all I wanted to tell you about an example of the training, this calculation on return on investment. Now we will move on to uh, another model, that is the Kaufman's model. And before we do the other things, because that is also in your course and it is given in your book also. And so let us do that, the Kaufman's model of calculation, learning evaluation. Actually, the Kaufman's model of learning evaluation is not much different. It is actually based on the Kirkpatrick model only. And the Kirkpatrick model, 4 levels have been extended here. And what Kaufman has done is they have split the first level into 2 different levels. So let us have a look at it. It was Roger Kaufman and John McKellar who published Levels of Evaluation, and they published a book called Beyond Kirkpatrick. And that is not a book, that was an article, sorry, in the Human Resource Development Quarterly. It was in the 1994 edition. And he came up with, it is popularly known as Kaufman's model, and he gave 5 levels of evaluation, and it is actually a response, or you could say a reaction to the Kirkpatrick's model. And what the model aims at is to improve upon the Kirkpatrick model in different ways. Now, Kaufman's model mirrors the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick model. All those 4 models are already there in Kirkpatrick's model. It mirrors that, except that it divides the first level, that is the reaction level in Kirkpatrick's model, into 2 and calls it input and process. So there you have input and process as 2 levels there. And Kaufman's, the rest of the levels are same. Kaufman's 5th level evaluates results for both the customer and society in general. And he also combines the second and third level. We'll have a look at it. So Kaufman's model is positioned as more practical than Kirkpatrick by some authors, but I am not a believer in that. If you ask my personal opinion, then I think Kirkpatrick's model is far, far better than this. We don't need it. Actually, this is a difficult task to calculate the 5th level of Kaufman's. So there are 5 levels in Kaufman's. Let us have a look at the 5 levels. Level 1, you can say level 1A because that is bifurcated from the Kirkpatrick's model. This covers the training materials such as digital resources that are used to support the training or coaching. For example, the PowerPoint, the videos, or anything that the trainer uses. Level 1B is the process. The second part of the first level measures the process, that is the delivery of the training. Process acceptability, efficiency, the actual delivery of the learning experience. That is what is tested here, or that is what is seen here. Then level 2 is the acquisition. Now this second level studies the payoffs for both individuals and small groups. And it is also the micro level client would usually be the learner, like the person who is using here. You will see that there's a lot of jargon or many terms that are used here, micro, mega, etc. So it is the how much the learner has learned. This is what is being measured. So you would be studying whether they acquired the learning and whether they used it on the job. So this is being done. Level 3 is the application. The third level evaluates how well participants utilize what they learned in their on-job performance. Level 4 is organizational payoff. You can say this is the results kind of thing in the Kirkpatrick. So Kaufman's fourth level measures payoffs for the organization as a whole, the macro level client. So the Kaufman model tries to identify micro level and macro level. That is, it is at a bigger level. And this would typically be the business or organization undertaking the evaluation. Hmm? And this level includes performance improvement evaluations and a cost benefit or cost consequence analysis. Level 5 of Kaufman is societal outcomes. He is bringing in the mega level clients, like how the society is getting affected. So it is focused on what he termed as mega level clients, and this could be referred to a business clientele or to the society as a whole. The environment of the organization, you could say, as a whole. Now, there are some differences between the Kirkpatrick model and Kaufman's. The Kaufman divided Kirkpatrick level 1 into input and process, as you have seen, and he grouped Kirkpatrick's level 2 and 3, learning level and the job behavior level, as micro levels. He grouped it into level 2. He added a fifth level that evaluates results for both the customer and the society. So this is what the difference is. Now the change one. Let's look at the change one, which is the division of Kirkpatrick's level 1 into input and process. Now this is actually very helpful, and this was a smart idea, which I feel. And he separates the evaluation of resources, quality and availability from the evaluation of its delivery. It is important to assess the quality of resources, whether they are outsourced, like they have been taken from outside of the organization, or within the workplace. It could be possible that you are running the course very well, and the delivery is very good, and the learning is taking place, but there are resources are insufficient. For example, the course material is not of a high quality, not to the level of the learners, or it could be that the trainer would be able to explain the concept more through a whiteboard and a marker, but the whiteboard is not supplied by the organization. So the trainer is finding it difficult. So the resources are insufficient. That is just an example that I'm citing. Or it could be that the materials were very good, very well drafted, but the trainer could not deliver them very well. Like he did not do justice to them. So it could be either way. So it is better to have that as a separate thing, two things, and evaluate it separately. So by separating resources from delivery, Kaufman's model makes it far easier to see which factor was responsible for the success or failure of the course. So it is easy to identify. Now the second change. The second change was done by Kaufman by grouping the Kirkpatrick levels 2 and 3 as micro levels. So using the Kirkpatrick model, a level 2 assessment would measure the learning that took place on a course. And level 3 would record whether the learning had an impact on the participant's job performance. That is the Kirkpatrick model. But this approach provides useful data that will help to resolve any issue. By grouping these micro levels, Kaufman's model places less emphasis on the reason why learning isn't making its way to the workplace. Actually, we are not able to find out by grouping them together just one level why the transfer of learning is not happening. And I find that this is a less helpful thing to do. And Kirkpatrick models, the levels 2 and 3 were good enough. They were good and they should be used as it is. So this is less helpful, as there are different reasons why course participants may or may not obtain new skills and knowledge from a course compared with the extent to which they apply what they learned on the job. Hmm. So that is there. And the third change that he did was adding a fifth level that evaluates results for both the customer and society. No, societal consequences and customer benefits are evaluated here. It is, I feel it is quite ideal. Like if you're able to do that, that is the ultimate thing any organization would want. But it is tough. This is actually in contrast to Kirkpatrick's levels of evaluation, which only look at the benefits to the business itself. The Kirkpatrick model tells at the last results level how the organization is benefiting. Hmm? Although there will be stakeholders who will be interested in the outcomes of the result level. The society will also be interested in the outcomes. If you're buying shares of that company or something, then you will be definitely be interested in knowing the results outcome. That is the Kirkpatrick's fourth level. So obtaining robust data at this level would be very expensive for most of the organizations. Like doing a survey in the society and do all that will be difficult, although some companies do attempt this. And this would also most likely result in the collection of lower quality anecdotal evidence with questionable results. By anecdotal, I mean here people say it like by word of mouth, or what people are saying. It may not be having a scientific basis, but you're just collecting that evidence. So with questionable results. So, and I find it less practicable. So by far, I think we didn't need this much. Of course, the first dividing the first level into two parts was a commendable thing that was done. So this is the Kaufman's model, and let us now move on to some other portions in our um, course. This is a tool that I want to talk to you about, and that is the SWOT analysis. If we are able to finish both of them, that would be wonderful, because then in the next session I will be having only one session left with you, and in the next session then I will be doing the report writing thing with you, and anything that is left over we will try to cover that. So SWOT analysis and training audit are the two topics that I want to discuss. Even if I am able to do one today, that would be wonderful. So SWOT analysis. Actually, SWOT you must be already familiar with. SWOT is actually an analysis to find out the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. SWOT stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. Uh, it is a very versatile tool, and it can be used almost anywhere. You can use it at home also. A lady who manages her house, she can do a SWOT analysis on any item that she purchases. Maybe she wants to buy a new fridge, and she can conduct a SWOT analysis. If you are conducting a function, for example, a man is marrying off his daughter, then he can conduct a SWOT analysis on the different options that he gets. The grooms would be grooms and all that, or how to manage that function, or whether to take which caterer to take or something. Yeah, this is a business analysis tool which is very widely used across organizations, and we can use it for training also. And to evaluate any training, particularly if you are getting proposals, if you're supposed to choose between one kind of training from another training, then this becomes a very useful tool. You can analyze the proposals that come your way, and by using SWOT. So here we list the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that are there in the proposals. So strengths is, when you're talking about strengths, what are the strengths of a training institute or function, or of a particular training strategy that is or could be used? What are trainers or other contributing people to the institute or function proud of? Hmm? Like, what do they have? What are their strengths? For example, a training institute could say that I was established long time back, and my trainings are recognized internationally. The certificates I give, they are organized, they are recognized internationally. And people, based upon, for example, you're doing the ISTD diploma. This is a diploma that could be recognized all over the country, and it will be an added qualification for you. So this is quite prestigious. So this is a strength that is there. And what evidence is there that existing training has pleased client organizations, trainees, and funding agencies? Hmm? What is the potential to improve either the effective or efficient use of available resources? So the strengths tell you this. Hmm? And weaknesses where a training institute is lacking, or a particular training function is weak, or maybe the delivery of the training is weak, or the course material is not up to date, or not matching the current situations, or it has become obsolete. What are the weaknesses of an organization's training function? And in the opinion of trainers, training administrators, stakeholders, and trainees at all levels, from senior officials to lower cadre workers, and from customers and beneficiaries, where are the deficiencies? So the weaknesses, in the weaknesses column, you list out the deficiencies that are there in any proposal or anything that you are conducting your SWOT analysis on. The opportunities tell you in what sort of ways can training and development generally, or training institutions or organizational training functions take advantage of opportunities created by technological changes or government initiatives. Actually, if you look at it closely, opportunities are something that are from outside. Similarly, are the threats that are something from the outside. Threats could be likely for changes to technology or government policies are likely to be dangerous to the existing strategies and resources being used to provide training in the public sector. Are expectations or demands likely to present threats, especially to training institutions or the roles and responsibilities of trainers? What I'm talking about are only the examples, like these are the things that matter. So if you look at it closely, the opportunities and threats are not within the organization or within the proposal or within the training function. They are from the outside and mostly futuristic. Huh? And whereas if you look at the strengths and weaknesses, they are inbuilt in the training institution, training function, or the proposal, or whatever you're doing the SWOT analysis on. The weaknesses also. So they are inbuilt things, and the opportunity and threats are futuristic things which are likely to be there. Every strength can be converted into an opportunity, and every weakness can, if it is ignored and not taken care of, it can lead to a threat. So that is how it goes. This is a format that is used for SWOT analysis. And what you do is you write your issue here, whatever you are doing the SWOT analysis. It is not necessary that you do a SWOT analysis on a whole training institute or a whole training function. You can take out the issues which matter, like one issue. For example, the venue of the training. That could be issue. For example, the course material. What are the inbuilt strengths in that? Or maybe for a proposal of training. You have come across a training proposal for giving IT training to a set of employees. And the organization has come up with a proposal and asking you that this will cost so much money. They are saying that they can divide the training into 7 modules, and it will take care of all the Microsoft Office application software, and they will give a test after each module is completed, and it is available in English or in Hindi. So you can list out the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities and threats in that. So here you write out the issue, and then the strengths in that, weaknesses in that, the opportunities and threats in that. I have written it this way horizontally, like I have written, sorry, horizontally, strengths, opportunities, weakness, and threats. It could be vertical also, like strengths, then opposite column weakness, then opportunities, and then threats. It doesn't matter. So that doesn't matter. You can write it either way. Now let us look at an example. The SWOT analysis tool is being used, and the issue is the creation of own distributor company to access new end user sectors not currently being developed. So this is the issue, and they want to conduct a SWOT analysis on this issue. Now the strengths are that the end user sales control and direction that would be there, and they would be able to have right products, quality and reliability, which will be in their hand, superior product performance, better product life and durability, spare manufacturing capacity. They will have their own customer list, staff will get some experience, there will be direct delivery capability, product innovations going on, and like they can be doing the product innovations inside, in-house also. They can serve from existing sites. Products have acquired accreditations, and processes and IT should go. Management is committed and confident. Then opportunities they listed in this could be like based upon the strengths only you can get the opportunities. They could develop new products. They could have local competitors have poor products, and they can like have more advantage over them in time to come. Profit margins will be good, and user respond to new ideas, could extend to overseas also. So they're thinking of going overseas. New specialist applications can surprise competitors and support core business economies, could seek better supplier deals and so on. So these are the things they think that are opportunities. Then weaknesses, customer lists, they haven't tested. There are some gaps in range for certain sectors. They would be very small player in the whole world. If they have their own distributor company, they can be just a small player. No direct marketing experience. They cannot supply end user abroad. Need more salespeople. Limited budget. No pilot or trial done yet. Don't have a detailed plan yet. Delivery staff needs training. Customer service staff need training. Processes and systems, etc. Management cover insufficient. So these are the weaknesses that they have presently, and they have to take care of that. If they don't give training, then it will be difficult to survive. They're a small player, then there is a chance of being overcome by big fish there out in the sea. Then the threats. Legislation could impact, environment effects would favor large competitors, existing core business distribution risk, market demand could be seasonal, like every time it may not be demanded. Retention of key staff critical, people might want to go into other companies and could distract from core business. Possible negative publicity, vulnerable to reactive attack by major competitors. These are the examples of this, and it is a very good tool as an evaluator. You must use this tool. So I have included, that is why I have included it. It is a very good tool to use almost anywhere. So let us go on to the next topic, that is the training audit. That is also in your course. Nowadays, training audit is also becoming quite popular. And why do we do training audit? actually, again, it is before you will see the likeness. Like you have so many models, and this is again a way. Like it is not necessary that you take a model only. You can do the training audit also, and basically all these models and the approach of auditing, they are doing the same thing. Some authors also do the learning audit, which they call it the learning audit rather than the training audit. And its purpose is to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the training. So again, you will end up with a list of strengths and weaknesses, and it is in terms of its current responsibilities and future commitments. So you may be able to strike a likeness between the SWOT tool and this. So since every organization is unique, each training audit is customized to meet the specific learning needs and requirements of each situation. So the thing is here that the important thing here is that you cannot have a single training audit for all the organizations or for all the training functions, and it has to be customized. Now, why should we conduct training audit? The first thing is to ensure your training programs match your organizational goals. Otherwise, the whole purpose of training will be waste. If you're not able to match the organization goals with training programs, then conducting such a training is not useful. Guarantee your training programs are complying with industry standards. Whatever is the current concurrent standard, that they are complying with that. Discover important gaps in your training programs. So performance training needs analysis gave you some data, and whether the training objectives are able to meet those gaps. And, or if there are gaps in the training program, like it is lacking somewhere, that will be given to you. Gain insight into your learners' preferences and determine the overall effectiveness of your training programs. Here, then again, this becomes important. The training needs analysis is matching or not with what you started, and with the training, what the training gave. So this is a matching, that is triangulating that change is important here. And this is why we do. Now, some deficiencies are there in learning programs. There are a number of them. I have just shortlisted a few of them. Like the learning programs can be deficient for a number of reasons. That the gaps could be there. Decision making. Stakeholders request poor learning design methods. And they want like less expensive, cheaper things, and poor design methods. Then resources are not available to produce more effective designs. You require more equipment or probably experts which you are not able to spend money on. Then project timelines do not enable more effective designs. Learning designers are unaware of better learning methods. There are new learning methods, new techniques. People are not aware of that. For example, the experiential learning tools. Conducting role plays in the class instead of lecture method. And this is, the designers are not aware of that. Learning designers are blind to opportunities for improvement. They don't know that even designers can undergo trainings. Legacy designs compel reuse of poor learning methods. Poor needs assessment, skew content to rock topics. Like the training needs assessment was not done very well, and the organization selected the wrong topics for training. Poor media choices limit motivation and learning impact. Then adherence to rigid instructional design rules. That is also, that hurts learning. So what do we gain by doing the training audit? deficiencies are uncovered, and improvements can be made. That is the two things that we can do. We can uncover deficiencies and make improvements. Sometimes the improvements can be made by learning design, and learning design teaching that can be done on learning audit gives us the ammunition to convince stakeholders. Like you can tell the stakeholders that this is the importance of making learning design improvements. So, now there are some steps to conduct training audit. So what we should do is catalog the training programs, that is making a list in details on that. Analyze learner data feedback, which is very important. You must get the information, obtain information, and then get the feedback and data. Evaluate employee performance and assess opportunities for improvement. And the most important thing is always tie training programs to organizational goals. So that is how we go about it. The first thing that we do is catalog the training programs. You will need to compile a list or a comprehensive catalog of all the training programs you have developed and you want to conduct a thorough audit on, as well as all the training programs your learners can access via your learning systems and platforms, especially if it is an e-learning program, then what are those? And having this master list or catalog will help you as you audit each individual training program to ensure that it is effective and up to date. So you might be noticing that we go in training audit, we go to the micro level. If you took notice in the ROI model of Jack J. Phillips, the trainings like sales and customer satisfaction and other trainings which like for machine learning or some specific skill training, they are easier to measure. And even Jack J. Phillips says that there's no need to uh, conduct ROI on all the trainings that the organization holds, that you should take some trainings only which can give you the real ROI. And he says that we should never ignore the intangible benefits. But when you're going in for training audit, we try to take in more trainings. Training audit is conducted on a number of trainings. So the next thing is to analyze the learner data and feedback. So you can use all those tools that we have discussed earlier, the questionnaires, the Likert scale, the survey, to collect the data, and then collect the feedback and then analyze the data. So look at your learners data to see which programs they take the most and how well they do in each of these programs. So there must be some tests, etc. So you must look at the results of the test. Actually, what it requires is to compile the data and then, which you did in the earlier step, and then analyze it. So the data that you had taken in the first step, you will analyze it. And if most of your learners don't do well in a certain training program, that program may be revamped. That should be like scraped off to suit their learning needs or preferences. Like you may think that it is quite drastic, but that is the thing that is required by the organization. For example, if learners seem to flock to a certain training program more so than the others, learn more about why they do so. Is the training program very interesting? Is it presented in an interesting way? Or is it something that gives them tips that is very useful to them? Is the program accessed via mobile apps when your other programs aren't? So that is an advantage that people can just look at their mobiles and learn what they want. Is it more interactive? And such learner data will provide you with insight into which training programs are more effective with your learners. You can also conduct polls and solicit learners' feedback directly to see which training program they prefer and why. You can even send them questionnaires and directly take the feedback. Now, evaluating the employee performance. You will also evaluate the employee performance and collect data, and the data will be like collected before learners engage in training programs so that it can be matched after the training program data. It can be matched with that to see what are the gaps and how much learning has happened. So evaluate the employee performance data collected before learners engage in training programs so that you can compare those data with the data collected after they engage in training programs. If a group of sales associate takes a sales training course, for example, then you want to make sure they become more effective salespeople, isn't it? And their sales performance should be better. They should be able to sell more. And after they take this training course, they should be like have some enhancement in their selling capacity. So you should be able to compare the before they're going on training how much sales they were doing, and after the training how much sales they are doing. So if the earlier data is available, then it will be easier for you to compare how the training has affected the employee performance. Then the next thing to do is assess opportunities for improvement. Look for areas where you can implement new technologies or strategies to make those programs better. Usually you can use learner data and feedback and employee performance data to discover new opportunities, as well as industry trends and research. For instance, you might discover that your compliance training program can and should be conducted with virtual reality technology, or that you need mobile apps for your onboard training programs. And scrap those programs that are not working, or incorporate newer technology into your training programs so that they can work better. Now, the last step, we said that always tie training programs to organizational goals. So it's very important. And as you comb through each training program, individual, make sure you tie each to an organizational goal. The training programs should be matching with the organizational goal. For example, the organizational goal could be that uh, become the best organization who sells cell phones, or probably some product. So that is one organization goal. So you must have a training program on enhancing the quality of that product. If your programs aren't tied to an organizational goal, they will not be effective or yield a high return on investment. So here again, we are talking about return on investment, and you can use any of the formulae for that, and you can combine one or more models also with this. So you get a lot of things like you get you have a number of tools which can be used in conjunction with one another. And this is where I want to stop today. If you have any questions, you're welcome. So I think we can call it a day today. The students are very silent today. Nobody has a question. Sharmishta, Arpita.
Hi, a very good evening to you.
Evening.
This is Sharmishta on this side.
Yeah, Sharmishta, tell me.
Well, it's really not related to a question, but there's a lot of reading that I have to do, and I have to catch up a lot on this particular topic that you've been teaching. And I must say that the sessions that I've attended, they've been really thorough. They've been very good. So thanks a lot to you. And I'm sure I'll have a lot of questions when we come for the next session, because like I said, I have a lot of reading to do, a lot of catching up, because I was not able to join for a little while.
It is all right, Sharmita. It is. I think there will be still time, no, for you to finish, because your main goal should be to finish this diploma, isn't it? When you are studying
That's
this, we can keep on learning throughout our lives, but we have focus for some time on some of the things. So your main focus
absolutely.
now should be on clearing this paper, and I think you will be able to, because I think if I have equipped you enough with enough knowledge, if you use all that, you'll
That's
be very
true.
well get through.
That's true.
So in the next session, we will do report writing.
Okay. Okay, so so in next session I understand would be on report writing and questions, right? Or do we have a
Okay.
separate session for that? No, these two.
No, I think I will have to club it with that, because in the
Right.
ninth session, there will be an expert from the Ministry of MSME,
I
and we will
see.
be talking about things like skill development councils and
Okay.
NSODC and all those things. I have no knowledge about that. So
Oh,
my
no, but
area,
it
that is not
sounds
my
intriguing.
area. So
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
welcome, Sharmishta.
Thank you.
I'm
Okay, I
Arpita
think,
here.
Arpita,
Uh,
yeah, you were so silent.
no, actually, there was so much of context and writing it down. It was taking
Oh,
time.
there's no need to write
Yeah.
it down. I can always share my PowerPoints.
Please
Please,
do
if
that,
you
because we
want
have been
Exactly.
doing it. We have
anyone,
been scribbling.
any one of you who wants the PowerPoints, they can be really shared. Like, I don't mind. It is for
Okay.
you
Yeah.
people. I've made it for you.
So
So
sweet.
you
Thank
can
you.
always use them. You can use them as a reference for the just revision for your exam also. And you can just keep them. So,
In fact,
sure.
ma'am, that was my question, that your notes itself are very comprehensive. Apart from this, from the books, is there any specific one that we need to go through